Hello, friends, and let's get started.
Justin Harper nervously adjusted the cuffs of his dark blue jacket as he and his wife, Melissa, walked to the door of the lavish mansion where their friend Nick Jenkins was hosting a party. The streaming lights and the muted hum of conversation were already coming from inside. Nick had invited them as obligatory guests, assuring them it would be the event of the year. Justin, however, felt out of place. "Are you sure we fit in here?" he asked, glancing at Melissa. She looked dazzling. The black dress fit her figure perfectly. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and her dainty earrings sparkled in the streetlight. She answered him with a slight grin, stopping to quickly adjust his tie. "Oh, Justin," she stretched out. "Nick wanted us here. He promised it would be fun here. Relax, have a drink. We deserve it." Justin sighed. He'd had a long day of work at the construction site, and the only thing he wanted to do was just relax and have a quiet evening at home. But he knew that such activities meant more to Melissa than they did to him, so he agreed. They stepped inside, and Justin was immediately hit with a wave of irritation. The large room was filled with rich and confident people who seemed to know how to behave in such places. There was the clinking of glasses and laughter everywhere. He instinctively reached for the nearest tray of drinks, trying to calm his nerves. Melissa immediately blended into the atmosphere. She said hello to Nick, exchanged pleasantries with his wife, and even managed to laugh at a couple of some strangers' jokes. Justin watched her from afar, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "Do you want something?" he asked, stepping closer to Melissa. "No, I'm good for now," she replied, her gaze quickly sliding somewhere over his shoulder. Justin saw that she was looking at a man standing near the bar. It was Chad Breaker, the famous baseball player that the sports channels hadn't shut up about for the past few years. He was taller than Justin, his broad-shouldered figure standing out in the crowd. His light brown hair and cocky smile made him almost a caricatured example of a star. But that was his strength. "Did you recognize him?" Justin asked, hoping her attention would soon shift. "Of course I did," Melissa replied, barely concealing her excitement. "It's Chad Breaker. Don't you remember how I said he was one of my favorite players?" Justin only nodded, trying to appear indifferent. Melissa, however, was not going to remain indifferent. Her smile grew wider, and she began to move towards the bar. "Melissa, wait," Justin said, grabbing her arm. "What are you doing?" She turned around with a sly glint in her eyes. "Just saying hi," she replied. Justin gave her a look, feeling his heart clench. He remained standing still as he watched her approach Chad. Their conversation started easily, with smiles and nods. Chad was clearly interested, leaning closer and gesturing for her to offer her a glass of champagne. A few minutes later, Melissa returned to Justin, glowing with excitement. "He's so cute," she said, not letting him get a word in edgewise. "Did you hear he recently signed a $20 million contract?" Justin frowned. "So, that's not why we came here." Melissa paused, her face a little more serious and her voice more playful. "Do you remember how we once joked that if a chance came up to spend the night with a famous actor, it wouldn't be considered cheating?" "What are you, Melissa?" "That was a joke," he replied, tensing up. "But it's not an actor, it's an athlete. So that changes everything," she said, her voice soft but determined. "This is a real chance, Justin. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Are you serious right now?" "Why wouldn't I be?" she replied cryptically. Justin didn't have time to answer. Melissa looked again at Chad, who waved her hand as if inviting her to come over. "I have to go, honey," she said, leaning over to give Justin a kiss on the cheek. "Melissa, wait," he said indignantly. His voice was firm, but she had already pulled away. He watched her walk over to Chad. Their conversation became more animated, and 10 minutes later, smiling and laughing, they walked out the side door together. Outraged by his wife's action, Justin was left standing in the banquet hall, surrounded by laughter and clinking glasses, but there was an emptiness in his soul. For another minute, he stood staring at the dark doorway where Melissa and Chad had disappeared. The buzz of the party continued, but now the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses seemed to him a deafening noise, muffled by a thick layer of irritation and resentment. When Justin realized that the evening was completely ruined, he approached Nick Jenkins, who was still standing with his glass of wine, entertaining the guests with his usual anecdotes. "Nick, thanks for the invitation, but I think I'm going to go," Justin said through clenched teeth. Nick frowned. What's wrong, my friend? Are you leaving so early? Where's Melissa? She just left with her new boyfriend, Justin answered reluctantly, not hiding his annoyance. Oh, probably with Chad? Nick grinned. You know, he's quite a catch, always attracting the attention of beautiful ladies. Justin held back the impulse to say something sarcastic in response. He just nodded exasperatedly and headed for the exit. His steps were quick, almost tense as he walked down the driveway to his car. On the drive home, Justin tried to keep his cool. He wanted to believe that Melissa was just caught up in a fleeting moment, that it was just a minor episode that meant nothing and would soon be forgotten. But something in her eyes and her smile, in the way she easily ignored his words, continued to depress him. He drove home, tossing his keys on the hallway table. The silence of the empty house only added to the feeling of loneliness. Justin took off his jacket and threw it on the back of a chair, heading into the kitchen to pour himself a whiskey. He sat in the living room with the glass in his hand, staring out the window at the empty street. The hours dragged on for an agonizingly long time. Midnight had passed, and Melissa still hadn't returned. Justin checked his phone, but there were no messages. He didn't feel like calling, he didn't want to look pathetic, but every minute of waiting seemed like an eternity to him. Around 2 in the morning, he heard the front door open. His heart twitched. He rose from the couch as Melissa stepped inside. Her hair was a little disheveled, but otherwise she looked pretty normal. "Where have you been?" he asked, trying to remain calm, though his voice betrayed his irritation. Melissa closed the door, kicked off her heels, and looked at him tiredly. "Justin, please don't start," she said softly. "Don't start? You left the party with that big shot, and you come back all disheveled at 2 in the morning. What am I supposed to think?" Melissa sighed, walking into the living room. She set her heels down by the couch and sat across from him, a guilty expression on her face. "We were just having coffee," she said, "at a coffee shop near the club. Chad wanted to talk, and I don't know. I felt so uncomfortable saying no to him. I know it was stupid." "Stupid?" Justin leaned forward. "You ditched me just to talk to some baseball player?" "I had a few too many drinks at the party and got carried away," she replied, rubbing her temples. "It was just a moment of weakness. Honestly, Justin, nothing happened." He stared at her for a long moment, trying to find some truth in her words. Her face seemed sincere, but something inside him stubbornly didn't believe her. "Do you realize what it looked like? Why, in fact, did you do it?" he asked, feeling his voice shake. Melissa stood up and walked over to him, sitting down next to him. Her hands touched his shoulders, and she looked him straight in the eyes. I wanted to have fun, but I realized that I love you, Justin," she said quietly. "I'm sorry. I made a mistake, and I lost myself for a moment, but I don't want to lose us." His heart clenched. Those words had always been his weak spot. He closed his eyes, feeling her touch, trying to quell the storm of emotions raging inside him. "If you love me, why did you leave me there?" he asked finally. She froze for a second, then squeezed his hand. "I was drunk and stupid," she repeated. "It won't happen again." Justin took a deep breath. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that she had truly realized her mistake. "Okay, I'll believe you this time," he said. "But it won't happen again, Melissa. Promise me." "I promise, my love," she replied quickly, hugging him. After the tense conversation, Justin and Melissa remained sitting next to each other in silence. She continued to hug him, and though he felt doubt, he couldn't resist her warmth. Melissa kissed his cheek, then his lips, as if trying to prove her love. "I want you to know how much for me to know." It's a whisper, its a look was regret and desire. Justin not answer in words, he reciprocated reciprocity on her kiss. Stubbornly, which Vizil in the air, gradually replaced by passion. They have gradually changed into a bedroom, and night has become a bourgeois and emotional mixture of anger, prostration, and desire. The world has become whole again. But even in the hottest moments, somewhere in the back of Justin's mind, there was still a seed of doubt that kept him from relaxing completely. In the morning, Justin sat at the kitchen table with a cup of strong coffee, looking out the window. Nothing seemed normal to him now. Ever since the night Melissa had come home and assured him that nothing had happened, that she loved him, An oppressive residue had settled in his soul. Melissa came downstairs dressed in a strict business suit. She quickly put on her shoes, fixed her hair, and glanced at her watch. "I'm running out, honey. I have a meeting downtown," she said, grabbing her bag. "Don't forget to order laundry, please." She turned around to kiss Justin briefly on the forehead. Her gesture was familiar, but this time it seemed to him that the kiss was mechanical, as if she was just performing a ritual. "Will you be back late?" he asked. "I don't know, maybe I'll stop by Linda's after work. She invited me over for dinner," Melissa said, avoiding his gaze. "I'll call you when I'm free." Justin nodded, trying to look indifferent, though his mind was already racing. The last month had been an ordeal for him. At first, he'd tried to convince himself that Melissa was being honest. She'd come home late, saying she'd been late at work or meeting up with friends. However, her phone, which she used to be able to leave safely on the table, was now always on her, and the screen was locked most of the time. She started wearing headphones, even at home, ostensibly to listen to podcasts, but Justin would notice her slight tension when he entered the room. One evening, he suggested, "Let's go out for dinner Friday night? To the Belvedere? You've wanted to go there for a long time." Melissa shook her head with a smile. "That's nice, but I already have plans with the girls. We wanted to go to the spa for the whole evening." Justin didn't argue, but her words stuck in his mind like a needle slowly scratching his confidence. He'd noticed that she'd started talking more often about last-minute plans, not including him in her weekend getaways. One time she said she was spending the evening with coworkers, but her perfume, too strong and seductive for a corporate meeting, caused him to have another bout of doubt. The days went by, and Justin began to feel his anxiety becoming unbearable. One evening, he tried to ask her directly, "Are you okay? You've been acting kind of strange lately." Melissa froze for a second, sitting at her phone, then laughed. "Melissa, everything's fine. What are you, jealous?" she joked, stroking his arm. "You know how much I love you." Her words were right, but her tone was too light, as if she wanted to change the subject quickly. It only made him more suspicious. Eventually, Justin realized he couldn't blindly trust her words. He called an old acquaintance, Ray Hendricks, a private investigator he'd once crossed paths with at work. "Ray, I need your help," he said bluntly when he answered. "I want you to check someone out. It's my wife." There was a short pause on the other end of the line. "Justin, are you sure? You'd better think twice about this kind of thing, or I might find something," he said, trying to break the awkward moment. "I'm sure," he answered, leaving no room for doubt. Ray asked for her picture, license plate number, and a rough schedule. Justin felt his heart pounding with tension as he sent everything Ray needed, but realized he had no other choice. A couple days later, Ray called to report back. "I've started surveillance," he reported. "Nothing suspicious so far, but her route is pretty erratic. Sometimes she's clearly stopping off somewhere that isn't work-related." Justin tried not to show how this information was tearing him up inside. He just nodded, realizing that the answers could be even worse than his guesses. One night when Melissa said she was staying at her friend's house, Ray texted him, "She's across town. It's definitely not at Linda's." Justin stared at the text until everything turned over inside. Soon a second message arrived, "I'll get the proof. I'll be in touch later." Justin was left sitting in the dark, realizing that his world was beginning to crumble and his fears were not in vain. 3 days later, Justin was already standing at the kitchen table, his eyes fixed on the folder Ray Hendricks had brought in. Inside were pictures that could destroy his marriage for good. The detective had said it was irrefutable evidence, but there was no way Justin could bring himself to open it. His fingers slid over the cover of the folder, feeling its rough surface. "Are you sure you want to see this?" Ray asked, sitting across from him. His voice was flat, but there was a sense of understanding in it. Justin nodded, slowly opening the folder. The first photo showed Melissa sitting at a table in a restaurant across from Chad Breaker. She was laughing, leaning across the table, her hand lightly touching his arm. The next image was of their figures disappearing behind the glass doors of the hotel. The last was Melissa at a baseball game, wearing a baseball cap with Chad's team logo on it. Her eyes were fixed on the field where he was throwing the ball. "It's all here," Ray said, leaning forward. "The dates, the locations. They meet regularly, Justin." Justin's heart sank. He felt a wave of rage rise up inside him, mixed with pain and humiliation. Thank you, Ray, he said. I'll deal with them now. That evening, Melissa returned home as if nothing had happened. She took off her coat, hung it on the hook, and smiled at Justin. Did you have dinner? She asked, walking into the kitchen. No, he answered, his voice as cold as ice. She noticed it immediately, frozen in place. Did something happen? Justin was silent for a few seconds, then pulled a folder out of a drawer and tossed it on the table in front of her. Explain this, he said, crossing his arms over his chest. Melissa frowned, looking at the folder, then slowly opened it. Her face paled, her eyes widening when she saw the pictures. She closed the folder abruptly and looked up at her husband. It came out by accident, she began. Accidentally? Justin stepped closer to her, his voice firm but not loud. You lied to me. You told me you loved me, and all the while you were seeing him. Melissa pressed her hands to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. Justin, I can explain everything. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything? His voice trailed off. You went to the restaurant with him. You went to his soccer game. You spent hotel nights with him. You cheated on me? What else aren't you telling me, you bastard? She tried to get closer, but he backed off. Look, it was a mistake, her voice shook. It was a fling. Shut up. Justin interrupted her sharply. He felt the anger take over him completely. I don't want to hear your excuses. You cheated and lied to my face every day. You slut. Melissa collapsed into a chair, covering her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook with sobs. Justin, please, she said through her tears. I made a mistake. Can't you forgive me? We can fix this, because I still love you. He stood still, his gaze cold and unwavering. You cheated on me, Melissa. Get your things and get out of here. She looked up at him, her eyes full of terror. Did you mean it? Yes, he answered. I don't want to see you anymore. Melissa was in tears as she gathered her things, her movements slow and shaky. Justin sat on the couch, staring at one point. When the door closed behind her, he felt both devastated and relieved. His marriage was over, but he had a revenge plan he was going to put into action. Justin parked his car in front of the luxurious penthouse where Chad Breaker lived. The building towered over the city, reflecting the light of the evening sky with its glass facades. He glanced at his watch, 7:15 p.m. The athlete was probably at home preparing for one of his evenings, which usually involved raucous parties or private meetings. Justin took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. In the glove compartment was a copy of the photos Ray had provided. He didn't need much to convince Chad that he was serious. He climbed the stairs and walked to the door, indicating his name to security. Are you here by invitation? A tall man in a black suit asked. No, Justin answered firmly. But I'm sure Chad will want to talk to me. Tell him Justin Harper is here. I'm his girlfriend's husband. The man frowned in incomprehension, but contacted the penthouse via walkie-talkie. After a moment, the guard nodded, letting Justin through. The door was opened by Chad himself, dressed in an expensive t-shirt and sweatpants. His face showed surprise mixed with irritation. Justin, to what do I owe this visit? He asked, leaning against the door jamb. I want to talk to you, Justin said, walking past him into the spacious living room. Chad closed the door, watching his guest's every move. I don't usually arrange private meetings with the husbands of my acquaintances' husbands, he added sarcastically. What do you want? Justin pulled an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket and placed it on the glass table. Chad glanced at it, then reluctantly opened it. The first picture was of Melissa in the restaurant, smiling at Chad. The next was of the two of them in bed. Flipping through the pictures, the baseball player's face turned stony. What do you mean by that? He asked, dropping the folder on the table. Justin sat across from him, folding his arms across his chest. You destroyed my family, Chad. You knew she was married, but that didn't stop you. Now I want justice. Chad grinned, but his smile was strained. Justice? I don't have a wife, and I'm not going to sleep with you, he said with a smug smile. I see you've been told to, and you don't get it. Justin replied coldly. I'm going to send these pictures and videos to the media. You know how the media loves stories like this. Headlines like baseball star ruins another man's family. This is your end, Chad. You're going to lose your sponsors, your reputation, everything you've got. You're bluffing, Chad quipped, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in his voice. Justin leaned closer, his eyes squinted. I have your role-playing videos of you and my wife, he said slowly. Do you think your fans and brands will want to know their hero is having this kind of fun? Chad froze. He tried to maintain a semblance of control, but a drop of sweat on his temple betrayed his nervousness. And what do you want? He asked forcefully. I want $2 million in compensation, Justin answered without blinking. On my account. Think of it as payment for my silence. Chad laughed, but there was no mirth in his voice. $2 million? Are you out of your mind? Maybe, Justin replied, but you don't have a choice. Think carefully before you say no. There was a long pause. Chad stood up and paced the room, clenching and unclenching his fists. Okay, he finally said, I'll do the transfer, but it's the last time you'll see me. Justin nodded. That's fine with me. Chad walked over to his laptop and opened the banking app. After a few minutes, he confirmed the transfer, turning the screen around so Justin could see the transaction confirmation. Done, he said, slamming the laptop lid shut. Now, I get out of here. Justin stood up, heading for the exit. He turned around at the door. Oh yeah, he added. I'd break things off with Melissa if I were you. She's cost you too much, and I may have infected her with something. Chad didn't answer, his face contorted with anger. The next morning, Melissa called Justin. Justin, what did you do? Chad said it was over and that it was because of you. You're the one who ruined everything, Melissa, he replied coldly. I just wanted to be compensated. He dropped the call, feeling relieved. Justin stood at his living room window, watching the last leaves of fall swirl in the cold air outside the window. He didn't need to look at his watch to know that the time was approaching. He felt a familiar prick of anxiety, but quickly pushed it away. Today was the day he would put a stop to it, once and for all. A knock sounded on the door. Justin took a deep breath before going to open it. Standing outside the door was Melissa. She looked like the last few days had been a never-ending nightmare for her. Her eyes were red, her hair was in a messy bun, and her face was a mixture of guilt and despair. Justin, she said quietly, her voice shaking. He didn't answer, stepping aside, allowing her to enter. Melissa walked into the living room, her steps cautious, as if she was afraid of doing something wrong. She stopped at the couch, turning around to face him. He walked over to the table and picked up a folder of papers, then placed it in front of her. These are the divorce papers, he said, his voice firm but quiet. Melissa went pale. What? She said, taking a step back. It's clearly spelled out here, he continued, ignoring her reaction. According to the prenup we signed, I get to keep all the property in case you cheat on me. She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. You can't do this. We can fix this. Please, Justin, think about what we had. We did, he interrupted. But it's gone now. She stood still, her shoulders shaking. What about me? Whisper it. Justin pointed to the papers again. Sign it, Melissa. She hesitated, but then, realizing it was pointless to argue, took the pen with trembling hands and signed each sheet. When she was done, Justin took the papers back, checking them over. Now, you have to leave, he said, looking at her. Melissa stood in shock, her face expressing a mixture of hurt and anger. Don't you love me anymore? She asked, her voice was almost a whisper. I loved you, he replied, but you ruined it. She didn't say another word. Silently picking up her bag, Melissa left, slamming the door. A week later, Justin sat in his attorney's office, watching the paperwork get processed. Chad had kept his promise. $2 million was already in his account. Now, with complete financial freedom, Justin felt a weight fall from his shoulders. He walked out of the office, stopped on the street, and felt fresh air fill his lungs for the first time in a long time. There was a new life ahead of him, and he was ready to face it with no regrets. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.